Think about this for a moment. One single figure, Jesus Christ. His life, death, resurrection, they've been central, debated, followed for, 2,000 years?
Mm-hmm.
So if everything spiritually significant really does hinge on him, hasn't it ever crossed your mind that maybe our understanding of his importance has shifted? Subtly, perhaps? Or even been, deliberately nudged over time?
That's a powerful starting question.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling that very idea, the enduring centrality of Christ, and why it's always been and still is such a point of, intense discussion.
Yeah, it really, Christ's significance isn't just for one era. The claim is it spans basically all of recorded history, 6,000 years as they put it, and even eternity.
That's a huge scope.
It is. And the implication is if you lose sight of that central point, you're bound to run into difficulties understanding, pretty much everything else, spiritually speaking.
It reframes relevance, doesn't it? It's not just, is he applicable now, but more like, are we remembering his foundational role?
Precisely. Actively keeping him central is what keeps him relevant, according to this view. It's an ongoing action, not a passive state.
Okay, so let's dig deeper into this cornerstone idea. The discussion we're looking at, it points out this recurring tendency, human tendency maybe, to kind of push aside that foundation.
Mm-hmm. Setting it aside.
Yeah, and sometimes established religious systems, maybe without meaning to, they end up prioritizing traditions over that cornerstone.
Right, like the familiar structure becomes more important than what it's actually built on. It's easy for that to happen,
And then there's this other concept. It introduced this idea of a separate community, those redeemed by the blood of the Lamb.
In the world, but not of it.
Exactly. Living here, dealing with all the world stuff, but operating from a completely different allegiance, a different set of rules almost, a spiritual kingdom, they call it.
And that immediately brings historical parallels to mind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The source material connects our current times to these recurring messages in Scripture.
Like the second angel's message and the call in Revelation 18, come out of her, my people.
Exactly that. It's presented not as something totally new, but as an echo, a repeat call to sort of reset when things have drifted.
Okay.
And the analogy they use of King Belshazzar's feast, that's quite vivid.
Yeah, the king partying, totally oblivious while his kingdom is about to crumble, the writing on the wall.
Right. And the suggestion is that many today might be similarly unaware of what are presented as, ominous signs, critical warnings being missed.
It says something about our capacity to just ignore or maybe misinterpret things, even when they seem obvious to others.
It really does. And Belshazzar's specific act using the sacred temple vessels for, common wine.
That's presented as a direct parallel, isn't it, to consuming false doctrine, the wine of Babylon from Revelation.
Yes, a kind of spiritual intoxication. And the worrying part is that this wine, these powerful but false ideas, they aren't just consumed by worldly powers.
The implication is they can seep into religious circles too, even among people who should know better.
That's the sobering point they make, that those claiming to uphold sacred truth could be subtly influenced by things that undermine it.
Wow. And needing a prophet, an interpreter, to even understand the warning, the writing on the wall.
It highlights the danger of dismissing those outside voices, doesn't it? The ones offering a different reading of the situation. If you can't read the signs, you're basically flying blind.
Which brings us smack into the present day. How is Christ's centrality viewed now with everything going on?
Well, that's the crucial question the material tackles. It points to things like, say, the Abrahamic Accords initiative seeking common ground, but where Christ's specific role seems perhaps noticeably absent from the framework.
Or at least not central to it.
Right. And then you just have the sheer noise of modern life. Yeah. Social issues, political chaos, climate change, all these urgent problems screaming for attention.
It's easy to see how they could overshadow what some see as the central message. It's like a constant battle for focus.
It is. There are so many bandwagons, as the source puts it, vying for our energy and attention. Mm-hmm. It makes you think about that human tendency to prioritize the immediate, the tangible, over the perhaps more abstract spiritual core.
It really is a crowded arena, but the discussion reminds us, even when Christ was physically here, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. He wasn't universally welcomed. His presence was deeply divisive.
Absolutely. It led directly to his crucifixion and then persecution for his followers. It wasn't a time of easy agreement.
Not at all. And the sources we're drawing from, they suggest this pattern continues. They actually predict a future alignment of kings of the world powers, against what Christ represents.
Yeah, a final conflict over him and his authority. It highlights that ongoing tension, that friction between God's kingdom, centered on Christ, and the kingdoms of this world.
And what's really interesting, or maybe concerning, depending on your view, is the role predicted for religious institutions in all this.
The material specifically mentions apostate Protestantism, suggesting a segment of Christianity itself will be involved in, challenging Christ's ultimate centrality.
Which loops back to the Reformation, doesn't it? Because that was a huge part of it, the feeling that Christ's role had been obscured by an earthly authority, the papacy.
Precisely. The whole sola Christus, Christ alone principle wasn't just a nice idea. It was a radical rejection of any human intermediary, rejecting the Mass as a re-sacrifice, insisting on Christ's finished work.
And people forget, wars were fought over this. Identifying the papacy of that time as the Antichrist described in Scripture wasn't a minor point for the Reformers. It was central to their understanding of prophecy and Christ's unique position.
It really underscores how high the stakes were perceived to be. Keeping Christ absolutely central wasn't negotiable.
So the worrying question the source raises is, could it happen again? Could the Christian world, maybe seeking convenience or unity or relevance,
compromise on that centrality?
Yeah. They draw that stark parallel to the ancient Jewish kingdom's decline, linking it directly to rejecting Christ when he came. It's presented as a historical warning.
A warning about the potential consequences when that core focus shifts, even gradually. It suggests that this isn't just theoretical theology. It has real, potentially devastating outcomes.
The discussion then gets into some specifics from the Reformation era. Things like praying to saints or Mary.
Identified by reformers as necromancy, basically, consulting the dead.
Right, contrasting starkly with the biblical idea of one mediator, Jesus Christ, not a whole hierarchy of intercessors.
And they also critique certain ways of interpreting prophecy, like preterism, saying it all happened in the past, or futurism, pushing it all off into the distant future.
Calling them Jesuit doctrines designed to undermine the reformers' understanding.
Exactly. Because if the prophecies in Daniel and Revelation aren't seen as spanning history and identifying specific powers, like the papacy as the reformer saw it, then the warnings lose their punch. It negates the identification of the Antichrist and the significance of things like God's law versus human tradition.
Precisely. And this view suggests that these alternative interpretations can then make ecumenical movements seem less problematic. Aligning with entities that historically were seen as having changed God's law might seem okay if you don't see the prophetic warning applying anymore.
Okay, so it connects directly to the papacy's claims too. The argument is that swearing allegiance to the Pope inherently detracts from Christ's unique role.
Because in God's kingdom, Christ is the sole lawgiver and redeemer. That's the assertion.
And they contrast Catholic doctrines about, say, bearing your own sin, purgatory,
with the Protestant understanding of Christ's all-sufficient atonement. His sacrifice covers it all. No need for purgatory or personal satisfaction for sin in that sense. So the underlying concern is that real ecumenical unity on this sphere might require glossing over these core differences about Christ himself.
It really highlights that tension.
Yeah.
Unity versus doctrinal integrity, especially concerning Christology.
Which naturally brings up how these things are viewed today, even within communities that traditionally held these Reformation views. Like the source mentions questioning within modern Adventism, for example.
Yeah, it points to voices seemingly downplaying or rejecting these traditional interpretations. And if you do hold to the traditional view, you risk being labeled,
an anti-Catholic bigot.
Right. But the counter-argument presented is crucial. Disagreeing with doctrines, papal authority, Marian dogmas, the Mass isn't the same as bigotry towards Catholic people.
That's a vital distinction. Critiquing a system versus condemning individuals.
And they reference historical texts, like the Great Controversy, which depict the papacy as a power structure that has historically opposed certain biblical truths, and note how some contemporary voices reject that historical analysis.
There's definitely a tension there, a debate about how to read history and prophecy, especially concerning major world events in the last century or so. Are the old interpretations still valid?
Exactly. But through all these challenges and shifts, the call remains to reaffirm the absolute centrality of Christ. That seems to be the unwavering anchor in the source's perspective.
So, connecting this to current events, the material analyzes, for instance, Donald Trump's stance against anti-Catholic bigotry.
Yeah, noting it could align with this broader ecumenical trend, potentially overlooking those historical theological concerns about specific papal doctrines and authority.
The worry expressed is that elevating one religious viewpoint so prominently, especially given historical context and advisors,
Could blow the lines. Separation of church and state and ultimately the unique authority of Christ could be diminished if one earthly religious head is given undue deference.
It raises questions, certainly. Then there's the mention of task forces against anti-Christian bias.
Which, okay, such bias exists, that's acknowledged. But the concern voiced is again about potential church-state entanglement. Where does combating bias end and promoting a specific religious viewpoint begin?
Especially when you talk about legislating morality. If a powerful global religious institution gets significant influence.
Whose morality gets legislated? And does it align with Christ's core teachings or with institutional priorities, pointing to papal encyclicals as potentially shaping societal norms through that influence?
Right. And they also touch briefly on the nature of some interfaith or ecumenical groups like Freemasonry, suggesting alignment with groups embracing diverse, even contradictory beliefs can dilute Christ's unique centrality.
It all seems to circle back to that core concern.
So the discussion really finishes with this strong call for personal vigilance, for individuals to keep Jesus Christ as their moral beacon, especially in this climate.
Stand firm. The idea is that defending Christ's unique centrality and authority will likely lead to conflict with prevailing worldviews. It won't always be comfortable.
And reiterating warnings against linking with groups, secret societies, or otherwise, who don't hold to what they see as core biblical principles, like God's commandments.
The final note is really a call to steadfastness. Stand firm for Christ's centrality, echoing that Reformation spirit, even if it means facing opposition.
So wrapping up this deep dive, drawing from the material we've looked at, it's pretty clear, isn't it? The centrality of Christ isn't presented as some dusty, outdated concept.
Not at all. It's framed as this fundamental truth that's been challenged, tested, debated all through history, and those challenges are still very much alive today, just maybe in different forms.
Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to consider. In a world that puts such a high value on unity, inclusivity, bringing diverse beliefs together, how do you personally make sure that the central role of Christ remains the solid foundation of your own faith and understanding?
Yeah, as things keep shifting and blending, what writing on the wall, what potential warnings in this complex landscape might you be overlooking right now? Something to really think about.